Okay, we are now live and good morning, everyone who is watching. We are the Senate Transportation Committee and it's Friday. We will continue our discussion this morning with Michelle from the agency. We're getting some briefings on some of the subjects. Our agenda is full, but we're going to probably not get through them all, but we'll do the best we can with the time we have. We're on the floor naturally at 11:30. So Michelle, good morning and welcome. And go ahead and continue what you would like to do. It's in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mazza. For the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Division Director of Policy Planning and Intermodal Development for the Agency of Transportation. I'd let you know that while it looks like we have a very, very full agenda this morning, many of these topics I think will be fairly quick. And we've asked anybody that is planning to testify to be on deck in case we get to them sooner than expected. So Liz is, as always, right on top of things. The first item on the agenda today it would be from the transportation bill as passed by the House, H433. And the House Transportation Committee included $50,000 in funding for an electric bicycle incentive program. And I believe that they were anticipating there would be 200 incentives offered, and sorry, I'm just trying to open the bill here. And that was what they were interested in advancing. And this would be under Section 17 of the bill. And what I would let you know is this would be an activity outside of the governor's recommended budget. They were asking for 200 incentives to be provided to 250 individuals who purchase a new motor assisted bike that contains an electric motor. And we have a number of activities going on relative to electric bicycles currently. Under our Mobility and Transportation Innovations grants, the MTI grants that you authorized last year, there are a few different elements supporting electric bicycles. In Chittenden County, there was a grant award to purchase 200 electric bikes for the greater Burlington area that would be part of a bike share program. And those bikes those bikes are expected to arrive in April. And then Local Motion is also launching electric bike lending libraries in Middlebury and Rutland this year so that folks can try electric bikes. And then Vital Communities, which is over in the Upper Valley area, is expanding its existing e-bike lending library to include new e-bike purchases.
Michelle, what's the price of an electric bike? Anybody have? What are we talking about? Are they expensive, or 12,000 or 10,000? Anybody know?
No, I was going to ask that the other day, and I don't know.
I'm just curious. I mean, I know. Anybody know what the price range?
I am not.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in e-bikes, but okay. I think that they're probably in the 1,000 and upward range. You might be able to get one for 500. I don't know if anybody else on the meeting has that information, but I can certainly get.
I'm just curious. I mean, I just wondering. We're allowing $200. You said $200 per one.
That's what the House is proposing. $200 incentive, and also many of the utilities are now offering bike incentives, e-bike incentives too. Green Mountain Power, which covers a lot of Vermont, offers a $300 rebate for e-bikes. Burlington Electric offers a $200 rebate, and then the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, for their customers, they're offering a $100 incentive for an e-bike or an e-bike electric retrofit. So that is what we know about about e-bikes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, Senator Chittenden, go ahead.
Gary Holloway's on. He was raising his hand on the pricing. I thought I heard that like 2,500, 3,000 for a good one. But Gary, did you want to chime in on how much e-bikes cost?
Yeah, I was just gonna. That's the ballpark. They're in the thousands. You can get used bikes for cheaper, and there are some probably. There's a lot of different companies coming on the market now that I'm sure are gonna. The prices will start to come down a little bit, but to get it's in the $1,000 plus. All the way up to $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a bike, depending on the if you're getting a cargo bike or you're just getting a commuter bike. So that's correct. I just want to.
When Burlington just bought 200, I saw, or whoever, some company. But what's the range? Do they have a range like by the miles or by the hour when you run them? Is it a 5 miles or 20 hours or?
Yeah, I don't remember the calculation, but I think there's both. I think they do calculate it in both miles and hours. And once again, it ranges as the battery technology evolves.
Okay.
Some of the ones that have been on the market for a few hours or for a few years may not be as, be able to go as far as some of the ones that are emerging this year on the market. So, but hours though, you can go for several hours on a charge.
Oh, good.
I just clicked on a bunch of them, and one of them it was at 2,200 on sale for 1,900. All-terrain Sport R750. It's got it's a 750 watt rear hub motor, and it's 25 to 50 miles per charge depending on pedal assist level.
Huh. That's I didn't think they were that inexpensive. Because regular bicycles are. I heard people spending $6,000-$7,000 on a bicycle. I mean, I don't know how they get that high, but they're
Expensive.
Oh, some mountain
48
bikes are more than that,
really.
Yeah.
and they aren't motorized except by very strong legs.
Yeah, I know.
This is 48 volt, 14 amp hour battery.
I see them out the mall, University Mall. They're all plugged in. You rent them by the hour or whatever. I guess you. So they're all being charged. Okay, just a side branch here. Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Anything else?
That's all we have. It is a House proposal, and
Okay.
that's
All
as
right.
much background. And thank you, Gary, for coming on early and helping out with this one.
Well, no, I just curious.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
big deal.
definitely.
Any questions about the 50,000 at this point? Well, I know we'll discuss it further as we go through the bill, but just to get an update of what they're proposing. Okay, go right ahead, Michelle.
All right. So the next topic we're going to talk about is continued deployment of electric vehicle charging equipment. And you all know that we had a goal of getting chargers within 30 miles of all Vermonters. We're going to be implementing those installations this year and reaching that goal. We have been working at the federal level to continue to get designated highway corridors for either electric vehicle charging ready or pending. And those designations are for our interstate corridors and some of our major national highway system routes, like parts of Route 2, Route 7, Route 4. I don't have the entire list directly in front of me today, but the idea being that we're anticipating under the Biden administration that there's going to be a significant deployment of resources for EV charging infrastructure along highway corridors. And so by having these designations, we are, sort of ready to be awarded those funds when they do finally roll through. We've made a lot of progress to date with the VW settlement monies. Gary and I were talking to you earlier this year about the report on where we stand. Our new proposal in the T-bill is to make $1 million investment in charging at home locations, specifically multi-unit dwellings. And you'll remember Anthea went through this the other day. That's where we have 10 or more units. We have targeted these areas because typically the homeowner in these rental unit situations, or they might be condominium situations, is not controlling the property, can't just have their electric company come and put in an EV charging station for, their own car. We need to come up with more creative ways to have these folks be able to charge in this type of housing environment. And so with 80% of our charging done at home, we felt that this was an important area to begin to explore. This is not an easy area to create a deployment system for. And there's been a lot of research around the country on this and a lot of effort put into how to best do this. And so we're talking about this being a pilot to help us better understand what scenarios might work. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to get into more of the details.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, hello everyone. Gary Holloway, Downtown Program Manager with Department of Housing and Community Development. Pleasure to be back in the committee with you today. Michelle provided a good overview of what the intention of the program is. We've been working with an interagency work group for the last several years, made up of 5 different agencies: Agency of Commerce, the Department of Environmental Conservation, VTrans, Public Service Department, and Department of Health, to kind of shape these programs. So we're the so-called experts, for electric charging for the state, and we've been collaborating with partners at Drive Electric Vermont, as well as listening to other experts from utilities and Drive Electric Vermont stakeholder group, which has a variety of different interest groups for electrification in Vermont. And so all of that information has helped inform us as we've been moving the programs forward, like Michelle mentioned, from focusing on highway charging to getting level 2 charging stations deployed across the state. We've been pretty thoughtful in terms of how we're going about this. Now with this particular funding, this is going into another sector, which is, like Michelle mentioned, it's a little bit more complicated because now we're dealing with a mixture of publicly owned and privately owned housing developments that have a variety of different setups in terms of parking. As you can imagine, some facilities have restricted access parking only for folks that live there, as well as guests. And we discussed this a little bit at the last meeting, and appreciated the ability to kind of have some flexibility in the program as we're piloting this, to provide infrastructure that can be both publicly accessible, as well as in certain circumstances have it be only accessible to the tenants of that particular property. There's a lot of considerations we're going to have to consider as we're developing the program, particularly around that access point, and how we're going to create the accessibility into, or not create accessibility into accessing the infrastructure. We also, in the last time I was in this committee, talked a little bit about the rate structure, and as you all can imagine, can be a barrier for some if charging their vehicle can be more expensive than putting gas in their vehicle. So oftentimes the installation costs, if they're too high, can be, that cost can be passed along to the consumer and then have a rate that's unreasonable. So having these subsidized programs helps bring down the cost of the installation of the units for the owners of the infrastructure. And also, just another layer of complexity, if you're citing these specifically for residents, oftentimes there are ways to reduce the cost of the installation and the actual cost of the electricity passed on. Because you have kind of a controlled environment, that there's X amount of tenants that you have that have electric vehicles, and in some cases we've heard folks charging just like a membership fee, or a nominal, $30 a month to charge your vehicle as much as you'd like. So there's a predictability for them in those particular scenarios. And they don't often have to have all the bells and whistles on that on those charging stations for additional networking fees or ability to collect, to be able to charge for the use of the charging station.
Gary, let me ask
Yeah.
you, what would happen if they had a complex had 20 units? How many charging stations would there be? Because I can see someone taking over for hours. And
right.
How would you handle that?
Right. And so you wouldn't want to have just one, and 20 maybe is too many. It depends on the size of the housing unit. There probably would need to, determine how many, current users and potential future users. So through a survey of, of their folks that live in the facility to kind of estimate on how many is the right amount for that particular installation. And yeah, these charging stations are different than fast charge stations where, you're not going to get a charge in 30 minutes, right? And just there's human habit. You go to work, you come home, you have your groceries, you carry them in, and you plug your car in. And then, you may not go back out and then plug your car again until the morning when you leave for work. So while you're not there, forever, you're there for, maybe 8 hours in a slot. So that's where you have to kind of strike the balance of having enough units for people who are considering getting a purchase or purchasing a vehicle. So yeah, I'll pause there. I don't want to go too far down in the weeds and confuse anybody, but I just want to reiterate that having flexibility in this program as a pilot, as we're kind of talking to all the experts around the state to try to figure out the best way to deploy this, is going to be helpful.
My other question would be, okay, say a person wants to put in some units in their complex. What do? They go to the Agency of Transportation, they ask for a permit, and then they install it, but who determines what they charge?
Right. So there's some with our current grant programs, we are approving the rate structure. That doesn't mean we get to dictate it. It just means that we want to have kind of a little bit of oversight as towards the range of rate structures that are out there. We don't want to see price gouging with state funding going into a program and then seeing price gouging. We don't want to see that. But we also don't want to go too far the other end and dictate the market and say you have to charge it at this specific rate. So Drive Electric Vermont, has offered some guidance around that in terms of kind of typical pricing for level 2 charging stations or for fast charge stations. And we've been offering that guidance to applicants who've been inquiring, who are new to this. And then things change a little bit too, as just like gas prices change, pricing can change within the electric utilities. And so there's that flexibility that needs to be there as well.
Questions out just before he goes further?
Yeah.
Yes, Senator Birchlick.
Yeah, so I do have a question on this section. I guess I still am having a hard time understanding why we would choose to do basically private residence charging instead of more public charging is the kind of overall general discussion. I know Michelle mentioned 80%, but that's just 80% charging at home, but that's just because that's where the chargers are. There's just not as many nationally public chargers, and that's kind of the people that are buying them, that have the ability to have those. It just seems like as we're trying to get more charging out there for people traveling around, why would this be the focus of the only money we're putting towards?
I'll jump in on that first, and Gary can backfill as needed. So as you've seen in our conversations related to who we're providing incentives to, we're really working hard to provide lower income Vermonters with incentives to get their household transportation costs reduced. And oftentimes lower income Vermonters might also be renters and might not have the ability to direct charging station installations at their rental home locations. And so we in this program would really be targeting working closely with VHFA and Housing Vermont and other groups that are developing housing for Vermonters who might be in lower income categories and who we might want to try and support in getting into electric vehicles and that sort of thing. And so we're not really.
Why don't you say that in here?
Why don't we say it? Well, I guess there could be a what's the terminology that's used in the legislative language? Findings or something like that inserted.
Why not put it in the description of what the grant program is? Because the way it's written now, you could do it all to $1 million condos, or the way I read it.
Yeah. No, we didn't. We did not differentiate exactly which income category of housing or type of housing we were looking to deploy this in, but that could certainly be a modification. I think low to moderate income housing units is really what we're talking about. We're not talking about condo associations or other places where there might be the means and ability for either the owners or the association to move forward with this type of thing.
Okay, well, I agree with that. If you're reading the letters on the page, you don't get that sense.
Yep,
That's what
gotcha.
So it'd be good that we make sure, put in the section 18 some language that this is our goal, this is what we're doing. That would be.
I just, I think that's really valid point. For consideration, I just would encourage us to think about, a lot of folks who are in kind of the workforce, who may not be considered low income, who are at a downstreet housing facility. So not to restrict us so far down that we're only talking about a certain income level, that we're actually allowing there to be a lot of folks who are just renting from the private sector, who, once again, we're going to have to figure out as a program development how we're going to qualify that. So to make it such that it's relatively easy for us to qualify somebody without. Anyway, if that makes sense, that we want to make sure there's a good. Maybe we don't need the millionaires to, they don't need this incentive, but there's a lot of people in the middle who are not in subsidized housing that do need access, who would appreciate having access to this infrastructure.
Right, and maybe it's to the owner of the building. Like if it's a downstreet, like you said, that's different than the private, just apartment building that wants to put it in.
Right.
And did you guys look at all at workplace charging, and as a way of those that don't have charging at home, they might, because they rent or don't have any parking associated with where they live, they just park on the street, so it'd be hard to have a charging situation for where they live. So but having it at workplace where it might even be open to the public, would you guys look at that as a comparison, as a priority for the money?
I would say right now we recognize that workplace charging is going to be a part of the mixture for sure. And there are programs out there right now promoting workplace charging through VITA loans and other. Green Mountain Power, I know, is working hard to advance workplace charging. We felt that this multifamily housing niche was one that we just needed to make some progress on in terms of piloting how we would best structure a program for moving forward with the sort of limited resources we had to direct to this effort in terms of our proposal.
And Michelle, one more. All the money from the VW grant program is allocated. Like there's no more grant rounds there. Like those grants have been issued and they're building the projects this summer.
I'll let Gary answer that.
Yeah. The majority of the $2.8 million is allocated. We do have, and I don't have the exact dollar amount here for testimony today, but we have in the ballpark of $100,000 to $150,000 probably left in that. That we just due to timing, we had to shift towards the funding that was allocated last year and the $750,000 in the transportation bill to focus on the highway. So we shifted from the VW into COVID and then swung around to deal with the 750. And now once, we just announced that round yesterday, and so now we can start to kind of take a breath, so to speak, and start to look at that remaining VW funding and and how to best. And we have flexibility there, right, where we can direct it towards workplace charging, additional public charging infrastructure. We have some flexibility there.
So there is some money, but how much did you say it was? Just like 100?
It's like 100 to 150 with some recapture that we had on a project or two that didn't go through. So that's just a ballpark estimate I'm giving you today. So it's not a lot of money that would get us a little bit more.
You haven't decided if it's enough to do another grant round or just put it into some other.
Right. We haven't had those detailed discussions yet.
And Mazza, can I ask?
Go ahead.
And that is on the grand plan. You were talking about the travel corridors and the interstates and state highways, and that you were looking at that. So is that what you're thinking? Like if there's more federal money or infrastructure money, that you have a plan for where those would go? Can you just talk more about what that plan is?
Yeah, we do not have a specific plan as to exactly where those would go. And that is part of the process that we need to continue to advance forward. And Gary, I don't know if you could elaborate further with regards to any specific planning process relative to where we go next past the infill, to continue the infill on charging within 30 miles of all Vermonters.
Right. I can speak specifically to that as far as, the fast charge corridor build out and meeting that goal of 30, within 30 miles of every Vermonter. We are within a couple locations right now with what's already allocated through the last award. And the one that we just announced yesterday, there's 2 additional locations that will complete that goal. So that goal will have been attained. And then another goal that we have is to build the redundancy that's necessary. And so we're in this current round, we're adding a few more locations of redundancy with, near some high use areas or potentially near areas where there's older infrastructure that may be going by the wayside at some point. And so there definitely is a goal in mind as far as fast charge on highway corridors to really start to look at building in stronger redundancy and having a more robust network. We haven't been able to really have those conversations to date because we've been dealing with the funding that we've had available, and we had to meet that first goal of 30 miles. As far as other applications with accessibility to level 2 public charging stations, just generally, workplace charging, additional, multi-unit dwelling charging, and then also kind of the thought of like destination charging too. We've had a lot of discussions around that, like, having charging stations at all our parks or big destinations around Vermont. Like we haven't really been able to target specifically on that yet because of, once again, the funding that we've had has been limited, and we've had to stay pretty focused. Now that we've spent the last few years and kind of starting to realize and achieve those goals, as I said, we can kind of take a step back now and be a little bit more strategic and imagining kind of a multi-step process now moving forward that we can achieve multiple goals or goals that you all dictate as the most important priorities, right?
I'd like to, because the 30-mile goal is good, except that you could be within 30 miles as you draw a circle, but it could be, 60 miles to get there. So I'd like to see a new goal that's on miles traveled. So within each fast charger, you can get to the next fast charger within X miles, whatever that is. Maybe it's 50 miles. You're never going to be more than 50 miles driving away from a vehicle. The 30-mile diameter isn't helpful in that regard. So that's what I think should be the goal, or something like that. That whenever you get in your car, you know that if you're in Vermont, you're never going to be 50 miles away from a fast charger. Something like that. At least if you're on a major corridor, so do those state highways, interstate. I mean, interstate, you have the exits, but something like that, I think would be a good next step in my view.
Yeah.
That's a
Great
great
point.
suggestion. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Questions? I might add, yesterday, Pennsylvania just released, they are down $500 million in gasoline tax revenue. So I just put that out, $500 million in gasoline tax revenues. And like I said, I endorse this, but boy, I still continue to worry about the more places we put out for electric without getting any income. We're going down the road that I don't know if we can stop it, but anyway, it's not an issue today. All right, anything else?
And the hard part on that is how to allocate how much of it is because of the transformation of the vehicle used from the fact I hardly leave my house anymore. So I am not doing much by the gas tax because of
It's a
COVID.
combination, right? It's a COVID.
Yeah.
thing. I'm not saying
Yeah.
100%, but
Yeah.
yes, you're right. That's
Yeah.
right.
No, it really has hammered. When you put the two together, it really does make a
Yeah.
big impact on revenues.
Yeah.
But I just want you to know that I don't even remember. I haven't even been out of state except to go down to Dartmouth Hitchcock. I have just, it's hard to imagine what our life has been the last year.
Just think of the
It's-
money you've saved, though. You know, you've got all that money piling up. You haven't spent any money traveling.
Yeah, maybe I can get a new car.
Well, that's what you can update and get yourself 20 years newer. You know.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, you got some relatives in the business, and you could get a car wholesale. You know.
I know.
Well, get an electric one.
Yeah. There you go.
My son's electric car, and Andy's got the same vehicle. He does like it. And let me tell you, that thing, you put on the accelerator and you're just about in the back seat. It's amazing how powerful they are.
Andy's got that Ford. That's going to be nice. That Mustang. Wow, that's exciting. Okay, go ahead. Anybody else have any questions or comments on for Gary or Michelle on this issue? All right, thank you very much, and we'll move on to the next one.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Take care.
Thank you, Senator Mazza.
Go
So next up, we're dealing with section 19 of the T-bill, which is a House proposal to offer zero fare transit for all of fiscal year 22. And Ross McDonald is here with us along with John Moore from Green Mountain Transit. And I would let you know that Ross will just give you a little background on what's been going on with transit fares since we got into the COVID situation, and where we anticipate we're going over fiscal year 22. And then I think John will talk a little bit about a minor modification to the language that we would want to entertain with you as we go forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ross.
Morning, Ross.
Thank-
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. And I just have just a few slides to kind of help me stay on the talking points here. But if everybody can see that very quickly, and as you know, we've been studying fare-free, the effects of fares on transit services, ridership, since I've been around. And in the last 15 years, we've reviewed fare-free policies multiple times, and not least of which last year, fare-free analysis was part of our Section 20 study. The report was how to increase usage of the Vermont public transit system, and that had some outcomes I'd like to discuss just very briefly. For our current situation, when COVID, was here, when the emergency period was announced, we immediately stopped taking fares to limit direct contact between our operators and the riders. And that has, been something that has continued, and concurrent to those types of steps, in addition to the barriers that we've installed, the 50% capacity, the increased sanitation efforts, we've been receiving some relief funds, and those funds are coming in at 100% federal rather than 50% federal for the operations portion, which does allow us to extend fare free service in the 5311 rural area through FY22. It's been captured in our budget and our plans. It's much easier for us to manage fare free element in the 5311 rural area than it is in the urban. And that is very specifically called out in the Section 20 survey. In the rural area, as we've discussed, about $520,000 a year are collected in fares, and about half of the services in the rural system are already fare free. RCT, Advanced Transit are fare free. GMCN in Bennington and Marble Valley and Rutland charge 50-cent fares. And so it doesn't make up a large percentage of our operation costs. So much different in the rural and the urban area, and I'll let John speak to that service. But when we look at the difference of $500,000 for all of the state versus $2.2 million in our urban area, where we have so much service, it's really two stories and two approaches we need to consider. Looking at the pending legislation, we have reached out and are working with the Chittenden County RPC on a scope that would fulfill the requirement of a fare-free assessment. I'm asking for them to take a look at the urban and rural areas in Chittenden County, and that would certainly be able to inform the rural areas throughout and really focus on the urban challenge therein. Last year, this was the recommendation from the Act 59 Section 20 report. And when they talk about the 40% ridership increase is generally in a urban area that already has the service. In the rural areas, we found that ridership is not likely to grow due to a reduction in fares, and that ridership limitations are generally connected to, the lack of robust services. But it certainly does allow us to provide smoother operations, reduce the capital costs of the fare boxes and the handling of those monies, and certainly allows us to promote rural transit as fare-free statewide. Wherever you are, if you want to get on the bus, it's very easy to access. That could be helpful as we try to rebuild and return to ride campaign that we'll be launching soon. But the whole idea was the next step that was recommended in the public transit policy plan and this study was to consider the budget implications, fare-free transit, evaluate the cost and benefit of expansion of the Capital Commuters Program, and those types of other approaches, which is the Capital Commuters Program was the state effort to incentivize public transit ridership, and the state for state employees and for legislators and their staff was to pay for 50% of the bus passes for their commutes to work. And we found that increased ridership by about 19% on our commuter routes, primarily on the Link Express. And we could continue to look at what John and GMT Urban do in their employee pass program in terms of trying to deal with fares in that way, rather than a simple cancellation of all fares. So, that's kind of my opening comments. I'd like to turn it over to John and get your initial take. But happy to answer questions as you guys deem fit.
Any questions for Ross before we move on? All right, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Ross. So I'll speak a little bit from GMT's perspective on the zero fare scenario. And I'll start by saying that the GMT board has had many conversations in terms of zero fare service, both during the pandemic and really post-pandemic. And I will say that at the board level, there's not a consensus to date. I think there's a lot of identification of the opportunity that comes along with fare free, but in our pre-pandemic budgetary process, we typically saw $2.3 to $2.4 million in fare revenue. And so our primary goal, with any length of continuation of zero fare is really to make sure that's not done at the expense of service reduction. For FY22 specifically, GMT's hope is that, you guys will consider some local policy decision-making ability by the GMT board when it comes to zero fare. Our initial FY22 budget did not include any zero fare continuation. We are assuming that we will start collecting fares to July 1. However, that budget was developed months ago, and since then there's been a lot of moving pieces, including significant amounts of federal relief funds flowing to GMT. So we do likely have the resources to continue the zero fare service in FY22. I will say that there's been very productive conversations at the GMT board level, looking at what would get GMT the biggest return on investment in terms of the public service that we provide. So if we needed to use $1 million for zero fare continuation in FY22, would we see a better return on investment if we were to say use that $1 million and increase our service levels by that amount? And so I think where the GMT board is right now is really defining, what does that return on an investment look like in terms of priorities? Because if you're talking about social equity versus access and mobility versus drawing new users to the system and trying to reduce, single occupancy vehicle use and congestion and, provide climate benefits, depending on what those goals and intended outcomes are, I think that's going to guide, the investment for GMT. And while some of that may be beyond FY22, I think there is certainly some conversations that will happen. What's the best use of these federal funds? From a staff perspective, we would consider, FY22 zero fare transit a one-time expense, which would seem appropriate to use one-time funds to cover that revenue need. But there are ongoing conversations at the board level, and to date, there's certainly not a consensus on the continuation. Although I will say, I think there's a lot of interest in that. And I would assume at our April board meeting in a few weeks, we'll have a clearer direction. Staff will be presenting a budgetary plan for the new ARPA funds that we've received. And that staff recommendation will likely include zero fare continuation in FY22. And we'll see what the resulting board conversations are.
What's the fare from Burlington to Montpelier? How much?
Well, pre-pandemic, $4 per one-way trip.
And what is it now?
Right now, all of our services are fare free.
Wow. Now, why wouldn't they have a fee like $2 even from Burlington to Montpelier or St. Albans? I mean, people would be glad to pay that and wouldn't have add a little income. I mean, I know that I can't imagine they can drive it cheaper than that. I mean, why isn't there some fee on a longer distance?
Well, so right now the zero fare is specific to COVID. In terms of trying to protect our workforce, in terms of social distancing, the zero fare allows us to use the rear door boarding. We've been very sensitive and cautious to protect our employees, understanding we want to protect their general health, but also, if we had an outbreak at GMT in terms of our driver pool or even our maintenance pool, we would not be able to operate service. So for continuation of service, we feel it's very important still to offer that rear door boarding. I think there is a policy decision conversation to be had on the link routes. They're longer distances. We kind of consider those our premium services. They're operated with different buses with more comfortable seats and Wi-Fi. So there are additional passenger amenities. I think one consideration will be what is the impact on telecommuting going into the future in terms of the demand on those commuter routes. But I think there's certainly room for a hybrid fare policy that maybe local fairs, for example, are fare free. In addition to public-private partnerships, GMT is actively engaging some opportunities there, regardless if we're charging a fare at the fare box or not. But also potentially having, different fares maintained for different services that we provide. So I think will be on the table as we, develop FY22 and beyond policies.
You wanted to go hands-free or whatever, would a donation box work at all? Or has that ever been thought about? I mean, people would that work or no?
We've never utilized that at GMT, but I know other transit properties around the state have. So we would be open and are open to any revenue generation that we can come up with. So that would certainly be considered.
Would it take away from any of the federal funds if you did collect any types of monies? Is there a penalty?
Not a direct penalty. There would be some local match impacts, and that's where those public-private partnerships will be critical to maintain. So some of our institutional partners, they pay us, or pre-COVID paid us on a per boarding basis, and we're able to use some of those funds to draw down other federal funds. So if we went to a zero fare model, we would rework our public-private contracts to a fixed cost agreement. So we'd still have that local match to draw down the federal funds.
Great deal. Free. Okay. Any other questions, comments at this point? I see none. I don't see Senator Perchlik on the screen. Any questions, Senator Perchlik? Or
I guess my question is, can you what it says in the bill is just that it's looking at it more, basically, is the short description. It really doesn't establish fare free. It just says we're doing it now. We're going to kind of continue to look at it. Is that an accurate description?
It is. And I think even more than that, we've heard from VPTA and Jamie Feehan. They want to ensure that any recommendations or outcomes from the study would still put the decision-making of whether or not to charge fares at the board level, at the regional provider level. And, obviously a little resistant from looking for us to ensure or to require our providers in any region to be fare free. They want it to be their decision after we go through this assessment. But, John and I are speaking with Charlie Baker at the CCRPC on the scope. And once again, we'll try to collect all these national approaches, various options as we move to looking what to do with fares. If you're going to charge fares, and I would like to back up a little bit for Senator Ingalls, how we treat fares is when we look at a route and its costs, then we take, before we bill out to the federal and state shares, we take the fares off the top. And so if you have $1 million route, $100,000 in fares,
Jackie, I want to try that coleslaw. I want a spoonful.
Then it's $900,000 that will be charged out. And so it will draw down our federal dollars a little bit faster, particularly again in that urban area, in the rural area. The $500,000 isn't that difficult to get to. But if we're going to have a few routes charging fares, that means all the buses need to have the fare box, and all the services need to accommodate those because those buses are fungible and are used throughout the routes. And so there's those types of nuances and details to work through, these models in terms of costs and ridership. Now, we certainly want more folks on those empty seats in our buses. If that's new riders, if they're current riders taking more trips, if there are people who can take more trips because they can afford, they don't need to worry about the cost. Those are things to be considered. And we'll be reporting to you guys in the next legislative session.
Okay, questions, comments? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, next.
So Senator Mazza, the next section, I'm going to ask Liz to let me share my screen. We have a very short section that Anthea has not covered with you yet, but I will just review that language quickly with you. And then Ross can speak to what we are already doing. So this language was added by the House Transportation Committee. This was driven by concerns they had that there was a lack of coordination, or maybe coordination could be enhanced, related to schedule interfaces between the public transit routes and our rail system routes and other transportation services that are provided, making sure that people are aware of how to use interconnected intermodal activities. So it's directing the agency in coordination with public transit, rail, and other service providers of transportation to review and implement coordinated intermodal connections to the extent practicable to ensure efficient and accessible intermodal transportation opportunities in Vermont. And it's directing the agency to also work with transportation service providers to support cross promotion of intermodal connections. And I think that what I will do is let Ross talk about the things that we already do and how this relates to the public transit policy plan. We're not sure if this language enhances our current efforts or not, but that'll be for you to decide. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Michelle. And it's true, when we look at this as a review, that seems appropriate to us because we do spend time every year with our providers looking at that intermodal connectivity. But this would be a statewide assessment and a way to ensure that we are making these multimodal connections where appropriate, and also a good opportunity to use the GoVermont multimodal trip planner and other marketing resources to ensure that the traveling public are understanding of how to get from one mode to another, whether it's off the train onto a bus. But as many of you know, we spend about 15% of our operation dollars as requirement through FTA on intercity bus service. And that is really focused on intermodal connectivity. Our Route 7 service by Premier Coach or Vermont TransLines is connecting Colchester down Route 7 to the Albany Airport, bus station, train station. We expect that the new Manchester Park and Ride would be a really good multimodal hub there for, we sit on the Park and Ride Committee to ensure that any park and ride being developed or rehabbed will accommodate the bus services in terms of turning radius, bus stops, and information at that site. So that's been relatively new in the last couple of years since I've joined that committee, and that has ensured some success, and we can continue to build off those types of experiences. Another example would be the microtransit service in Montpelier. In the past, it was very difficult to design a route that would include running out to the train station as we look at time points and all those things. With the microtransit service, it was pretty easy to just continue our route, our service area to pull in that train station so that anybody arriving can see the sign saying, oh, if you need a ride into town, contact this number and we'll come and get you. And so that would be, another thing to really assess in this microtransit pilot, which is this something that we could replicate in other areas? Rutland comes to mind, with their train station, those types of efforts. Greyhound is running or used to run from Montreal through Springfield, Mass. We pay for a portion of those services, again, trying to ensure connectivity on that side of the state. So we're looking forward to this assessment. I spoke with Dan Courier, our IT data GoVermont program manager, and he's has some ideas on how we can roll up these multimodal areas and really do a heat map and show where the connectivity is happening, where it could happen and where it doesn't happen for all these reasons, like the train comes in after service hours. And then we can have that discussion of what's that return on investment if we were to extend hours or to provide microtransit services for better multimodal connectivity. That should be revealed in this assessment and review.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, Senator Chittenden.
I'm, if anything, consistent. I like making the same comments over and over again because sooner or later they start to gain traction. Senator Perchlik is chuckling. Just one thing that, Ross, that I'm sure you've heard me say before, and I've said this to Charlie Baker, as you start to look at these intermodal connections. I used to commute to Montpelier when I worked at National Life, and I remember sitting freezing at the Richmond Park and Ride, staring at that gas station, wondering if I had time to get over there to get a cup of coffee, use the facilities, or otherwise get an errand done. I hope as you undertake this, you really consider ways that we can do public-private partnerships to incentivize grocery stores or other amenity-oriented parking spaces. I think of the University Mall, that huge barren parking lot that often sits empty, and finding ways to get those people that need the parking spots for those peak shopping times to find ways to incentivize them to want to have it for office hours or business hours to utilize that permeable surface or impermeable surface. And also, while at the same time attracting more choice riders to public transportation. I don't know if that made any sense, but I'm a big fan of amenity-oriented parking rides, not just parking lots sitting out in a field somewhere waiting for a bus without the adequate facilities and hot coffee.
No, it makes a lot of sense, Senator. And for us, as we look at using these one-time COVID relief funds, we have to focus on the ridership experience. The AVL, or the Automated Vehicle Location Service, has proven its value. Can we upgrade our bus stops for a more for a better aesthetic, for heat lamps that are solar powered where possible? As you'd mentioned, so many of us have been sitting in those bus stops, freezing to death, and just feeling like you're not being respected, or you're not promoting the service as well as you can. So passenger amenities need to be improved, and we feel we can spend a portion of those relief funds on capital projects. It can extend and expand our AVL services for better planning data that we're using at GMT. We also may partner with the AARP with their livability program to design and to produce a series of bus stops that meet a Vermont aesthetic, that is part of a public-private partnership where they would do the labor for free, and that towns would design elements or parts of a bus stop that could maybe make some sort of branded connectivity, like those bears in Wilmington or something, if we had a better suite of amenities. When we look at the types of seats that we order in our buses, are there more comfortable options? Can we ensure we get Wi-Fi on more vehicles? Those are the types of things that we're working with our providers on now. That should all contribute to better ridership. That intermodal connectivity is difficult. If that train comes in anywhere from 10 minutes to 40 minutes late most days, then it's really tough to meet up, and we can't have the bus just waiting there with other passengers. And so, again, that demand response piece could be an element in our recommendations, where we don't extend service or a route, but we do expend a few hours or have some call-in option for that connectivity where, on demand versus hoping that people get on the bus if we spend all the money and get it there every day.
Yes, Senator Chittenden.
All set, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
I can say,
Yep, go right ahead.
Mazza, that the transit app, I think, has been a great, even though I haven't done any much or very much bus riding because of COVID, that when that came out, and I've used it a couple times since, it's been really helpful to be able to see where the bus is. And I think that goes to Senator Chittenden's point, like, if even though if the stop isn't as good as it can be, you'll know how much time you have, whether you can run over the gas station or not. And I really applaud the agency for making that happen.
How's electric buses working out? They working out well?
Not so far, Senator. We have two large Proterra buses in service in the Burlington area, and we've only been able to use them to about 30% of the miles that we had planned to put on them to date. One
Wow.
of them have been having issues, not with the battery, the drivetrain, it's the other piece parts that that are part of the door system. There was a maintenance issue. There's been some charging. We've been learning a lot, I can say that. But they seem to have been addressing those issues, and those miles per week are climbing. It's important to get those miles up because those miles are contingent on the amount of dollars we're able to receive from the Burlington Electric Department in terms of their funding, spending more than $55,000 a bus to help us pay for those electric vehicles. The other item to report on the electrification efforts is that we went out on the street for some cutaway electric vehicles that make up about 70% of our fleet. And we're disappointed that the two proposals that came back were showing about 100, 110 mile ranges when we're really hoping for more closer to 200. We almost weren't able to make an award, but the two entities that we're reviewing those specs feel like they do have enough service or a few routes that these electric buses could work for. If there's a break in the middle of the day, they can use the electric bus in the morning and then switch that out in the afternoon run. While so with a ICE or internal combustion engine. So those are the types of considerations we're having. The electrification plan is underway, and AECOM is the lead contractor there. They're doing a full assessment of electric capacity, bus costs, route requirements, so that at the end of the day, we'll see these types of vehicles at this cost could replace these ICE vehicles for those particular routes. And as the specs get better, as the costs go down, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more. But I would be remiss if I didn't share that to date, the electrification efforts have not gone according to plan or application. We're not giving up. We're just learning as we go.
Because they have so much exposed to the sunlight, any thought of solar on the top of the buses? Is that something that's thought about, or?
You know, we haven't heard of that. We've heard of some solar efforts to help with the electrification infrastructure, where if you could charge the vehicles at night from solar captured power, that
Right.
could be a really interesting component. What we see in terms of en route charging are those en route charging infrastructure where you pull up to a stop and it's underneath a charging station that automatically charges the bus as it's waiting at its stop. Right of way, land use, costs of those things seem prohibitive, but
Right.
those are the en route charging that I've been asked to consider, as well as the AECOM people said, well, you may need 2 electric buses for some of these routes at the current specs, and I just don't know if that's something we're willing to entertain. I was surprised and disappointed to hear those things. We were expecting to trade out one internal combustion engine for one electric engine for the extra costs, saving us money on PM, preventive maintenance over its life cycle, all those things. But we've got a lot to address in this electrification plan.
Because the trucking industry, there's some solar putting on some of the trucks in the country. They're experimenting with that. I didn't know the bus because they have so much flat top to them that was a possibility.
Haven't seen it.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, I think so. Who services those buses? You have somebody has to service them, or are you trained yourself? Because because I know electric vehicles are tough to service.
Well, they can be, and they're also a little easier to service because of the
Right.
reduction of lube oil filters and all those things.
Right.
When we purchase these vehicles, we purchase the training program
Okay.
along with those vehicles,
Okay.
so that they are going to be serviced with the new certifications and technicians. We hope that may be also able to draw more interest in the maintenance field of
Right.
which we do have a hard time, filling all of those
Right.
maintenance positions.
Okay, questions? Anyone? Comments? Okay, thank you very much, Ross. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Senator
Yeah.
Mazza, before we lose Ross, and since he's already halfway through his presentation on our vehicle electrification plan,
Okay,
I'm just going to share my screen and show you the language in the T-bill in, hold on. In section 22. Can you
Okay.
see that now?
yep.
So basically, this is just letting you know that the agency, in consultation with our public transit providers, is going to prepare a long-range plan that outlines the cost, timeline, training, maintenance, and operational actions required to move to a fully electric public transit fleet. And that we'll be reporting back to you in January of next year related to this long-range plan. We have a lot of people that say, oh, we should just start buying electric buses if we buy a new bus. And you heard from Ross some of the challenges that we might
100
face
miles
if
don't
we,
go far.
yeah. So, we need to better understand the technology that's coming, what the costs are going to be, how we're going to sort of continue to support the system we need while we move it to an electric fleet. But we know that we can't just jump into it without planning. And so we are just put that language in the T-bill. The study is already underway, as Ross indicated. We just got a consultant on board. And if you have any questions, we can have Ross answer those right now.
Does anybody know Premier Bus is the biggest around? They have, I don't know, well over 100 buses. I wonder if they're doing anything with electric, or does anybody know that or not? But I know they're private business, so I know that's not. Yes, Senator Chittenden.
So I was the last GMT chair, and I was part of that process looking at electric buses. I don't remember Premier being one of the.
Okay, I didn't know because they have they're huge right now. They cover all the.
Ross probably knows more definitively if they're in that.
Okay.
Well, I do get to speak with Chip and Randy quite a bit as they provide our services along Route 7 intercity, and they came up with their own brand, Vermont Trains Lines, specifically to bid on the intercity service, and they've done a wonderful job. Their buses are an upgrade over Greyhounds. Their services, it's really premier service.
Yeah, they do a good job. But from what I heard, everybody tells me they do it first class, and they got good buses. They're brand new, and they service them. And so I'm just curious. I know they're huge. So
Yeah.
you contract with them also with some of their work. Oh, okay.
Absolutely, and I'll ask them.
Yeah, just curious. Yeah.
I'm curious too. I do have just one slide to share if I could do
Go
this
ahead.
correctly.
All right.
Let's see if this works.
Yep, you got up there.
Thank goodness. And I apologize for the lack of slides earlier. But these are the components, and as Michelle had mentioned, and myself, we're just starting here. But this approach includes an economist for modeling. It includes transportation professionals and outreach people, and a real nice group of 7 professionals who have been specializing in electrification plans around the country for the last couple of years. We're not the only ones who are looking at this industry, of course. So what they came to us with was an approach where we have bi-monthly meetings, and they're going to be producing 8 memos, anything from state of the industry, of which they're doing now, stakeholder outreach, just approved a survey to all our providers, assessing the existing conditions in terms of infrastructure and those types of things, the energy needs, road and block analyses on the routes and what the vehicle specs would need to be to cover those routes, how to procure the IT and the training that we talked a little bit about, training for the bus drivers. We asked the drivers to drive quite differently with these buses because the regen brakes or the effects of the heating, the effects of jackrabbit starts, those types of things. schedule for fleet transition. That'll be where The Economist is allowing us to show if we wanted to be 80% electric in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, all of those numbers should be able to be manipulated. We also have a technical advisory committee. People from the public service department, VEIC, who helps us with our electrification programs. FTA is part of that. Our cross-border coordination council are sitting on that, as well as Dan Dutcher and others. So all of these memos will be going out to this group of Vermonters who can assess where we are and how that fits in with their other electrification analyses in terms of Climate Council and the Comprehensive Energy Plan. So that's also another component of this technical plan. And also Representative Gabby Stebbins has agreed, and she's been very active in these discussions. And so we've welcomed her to the process as well.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. We can move on, Michelle.
Yeah, so Senator Mazza, we have one section left. Well, it's actually 3 sections, but they're all tied together. We probably have about 20 minutes of conversation on that. And
Okay.
that's all we have for the rest of the morning.
Does the
and
committee want
so-
to keep going or take a break? Or what do you want to do?
I have to leave by 10:30, so for whatever that's worth, I'll be gone after 10:30.
Okay.
And I have to be on another call at 11. So why don't we just keep plugging and get done a little early?
Okay, go ahead. All right, go ahead.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so this morning I'm here with Dave Roberts from Drive Electric Vermont. Dan Dutcher was going to join us, but he's out ill today, so Dave and I will cover things for you. And I'm just going to share my screen, and let me just get to the right section before I move there. We're going to be talking about sections 8, 9, and 10, and this has to do with the new EV incentive program. Hold on a second. My apologies. We're jumping all around this morning. And Anthea did.
Put your EV incentive, Senator? I guess he didn't hear me. Senator
What was
Persick,
that?
did you get your EV incentive when you got your EV?
Well, I'll get one from GMP. I won't get the state one because
Okay, all right.
the legislature pays me too much money, so I don't know.
All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. So section 8, Lee and Thea went over this the other day. This is where for the new vehicles, the incentive program resides. The administration's proposal was for $1.25 million in one-time spending on this. The House Transportation Committee added $2 million to the incentive program. In the section here, you'll see that of the 3.25 million that's in the bill currently, 250,000 of that goes towards our public-private partnership with Drive Electric Vermont to support the expansion of the electric vehicle market in Vermont. And there's a lot of training, outreach, coordination assistance relative to the incentive program, marketing, demonstration events, website, convening of partners that work in this area on a quarterly basis. There's a whole lot of things that Dave Roberts and his team do that we need as part of this framework. And so that money is built in here. And then
Michelle,
yeah.
I have a question. Is that is going back the 3.25, and you said the governor's recommend was 1.25?
That's correct.
So the 2 million more, I'm just trying to crosswalk that with the 4.775
Yeah.
increase.
Yeah.
and I have like 1 million more for PV incentives, but this is 2 million. So I'm just trying to,
I'm sorry. Maybe Dave can help me. Was the governor's recommend $2 million, Dave?
I don't have that right in front of me either. I know Chris from JFO, and for the record, Dave Roberts, I'm the Drive Electric Vermont coordinator at VIC. I know Chris Root provided a table kind of comparing the governor's recommend.
Yeah, I can bring
came out
that
of the
table up.
House.
Chris was.
okay. All right, well, I can look at the table later. I was just trying to reconcile it back to the overall increase, which I assume this was swapped out money to do.
Yes, and I'm sorry that if I've mixed that number up.
I didn't think there was an increase. I thought they followed the governor's recommend on.
I can't hear you,
Well-
Andy. What'd you say?
I thought they didn't increase it. I thought they followed the governor's recommend, but I don't have it in front of me either.
Oh, no, I have a note here that that there was an increase of 1 million for
Here we go.
PEV incentives.
Okay, I'm sorry. The governor's recommend was 2.25. You'll see it here, section 8 of this chart I've just put up. And so
Okay.
they increased it by $1 million.
Okay, now it adds up. All right, thank you.
I've been in front of this screen too many hours this week and things are starting to blend.
Well, I haven't spent hardly any time in front of a screen.
Why?
Why? I'm just being facetious.
Yeah.
I have been on since 8 in the
That's 'cause-
morning till,
I was gonna
Like-
say, I gotta try to figure out that trick.
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right, we've solved that mystery. Thank you very much, Senator Kitchell, for clarifying that. And my apologies to the governor's office that I didn't have that message in my mind.
No, that's okay. The only reason I would have it is because I was looking back at my notes and trying to reconcile the amounts here. That was all.
Senator Mazza, you probably didn't notice, but Senator Kitchell was right again.
Yeah, I know. I just picked that up again. If I hear that one more time, I'm going off air. I'm going offline. You know, I heard it all day yesterday and all day before. Senator Kitchell, you're right. Oh, God. Oh, I can't handle much more.
I'm glad it's Friday.
Well, you can see how cluttered my brain is.
Oh,
I
boy.
can't imagine. I can't.
You must get sick of being right, though. That's gonna be terrible. God, it's gonna be an awful. That's a terrible.
Well,
Hey, don't you get sick of hearing that every day? Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Tell her she's right one more time.
also, just to go back, I think we were talking about having the word new where it's located. We were thinking that it might be better to change the heading so it really is an incentive program for new PVEs or something like that, because we were thinking we were creating a new program as opposed to the new modifying the PEV.
If we give much more money to buy electric vehicles, we might as well give them the car and forget anything to purchase it. You know, just give it away. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I've made a note to check in with Anthea on that. All right, so the other thing we're doing in this section this time around is in sub-item B, we may use not more than 10% of the authorization for costs associated with the administration of the program. And you heard me talk yesterday or the day before about the fact that originally we had a very small pool of money. We had to get the distribution utilities to help us implement the program in terms of the back office administration. And we would like to evolve this program along with the Replace Your Ride if that is authorized and the Mileage Smart under one umbrella with one administration function, with everything streamlined sort of and working closely together so that we have a more efficient program as we move forward. And so this just calls out that we may use some of the monies for administration of the program. All right. The other thing we did, and Anthea talked about this, she put the chart up the other day, was for folks who are basically, in this case, an individual with a filing status as a surviving spouse, as well as a married couple, that we move the tier up to $75,000, recognizing that there might be a larger household included here, and wanting to expand the number of folks that would be eligible within this framework, versus treating married and a surviving spouse who may have a household to take care of at the same way we would treat an individual. And this continues on with the 75,000. Yes.
Senator Madsen.
Yep.
I had a question back on the money for Drive Electric Vermont, which
Yes.
I support. I think they do a good job. In fact, I should tell Dave that I have friends in other states that are looking at electric cars, and they call me, and then I send them to Drive Electric Vermont, and they say, wow, this is much better than my state's website. So we have people even outside of Vermont using our website. But why do you call it a public-private partnership? Like, what is the partnership aspect of it? What is it? Why isn't it just a grant to Drive Electric Vermont? You know what I mean?
I do. I think that the fact that we have named them specifically as the party that we are going to partner with, we've been in relationship with them for over 10 or 12 years now, doing this work to evolve this market in Vermont. We're not just going out to bid for anybody. We've invested in Drive Electric Vermont as one of the founding members, the state of Vermont, through our air quality division, as well as our transportation agency. And Drive Electric Vermont is it's a conglomeration of stakeholders that come together to try and advance this mission. While it is under the rubric of Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, or VEIC now, it really serves more as a quasi-public organization that is part of our core mission. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that was why.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So we've talked about these income levels for married and surviving spouse. I'm just going to skip through that language. And we are now, so there's sort of section 8 is about the funding level. Section 9 is about those income level adjustments for married and surviving spouse. And section 10, which is the last section, is about the fact that we, as I mentioned, we're able to engage the state's distribution utilities with no-cost contracts to assist us in doing the funding administration of the program between the dealerships, getting the customers into vehicles, and getting folks reimbursed, whether they're a dealer or maybe a private person not going through a dealership. The DUs have done the back office paperwork, and the language in statute says that they shall do that work. And while they are willing to do that work, and they've done a great job and they're happy to move forward with it, we are hoping that we may potentially evolve to a framework where we have a program administrator and we don't have to rely on the DUs, distribution utilities, to do this work. And so we suggested that perhaps we repeal this section of statute where we require that they do this work.
Okay.
Where is that? Striking that?
It's here in section 10. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the bill. It's a little easier than the screen.
Sorry, section 10, number 4, and it's on page 12,
Right.
bottom of the page.
Oh, through no con. So, but it doesn't really say that electric distribution utilities have to do it at no cost. It just says you should do it through no cost.
Well, it says the agency shall administer the program described in section B through no-cost contracts with the distribution utilities. I guess we interpreted that to say that's how we have to administer the program.
Right, but the way I thought you were saying that it said that electric distribution utilities had to do it this way, but it doesn't require them to do anything. Like if they said we're not doing it no cost, they wouldn't be in violation of this.
You're right. That's correct.
Okay.
And
You're
I believe-
correct. Would you make a note of that? Huh?
That's only because Senator Kitchell sent me a text to ask that question.
Yeah, exactly. We know the relationship there. Yeah.
So that's what we have there. I have Dave with me in case there were any specific program amount of questions that you folks had about these changes or anything else to do with the program, but that's it.
So Michelle, the changes in the income levels, that's not being proposed by the, I want to be clear, was that proposed by the administration or that came from the House?
We proposed that change, not the House. Yeah.
Okay, all right, so the House concurred with what the administration was proposing. Okay,
That's
thank you.
In Mazza?
Yes, go right ahead.
Michelle or Dave, did you guys look at all, not that I'm advocating for it, but I just wondered if you looked at the income levels, did you look at the car? I think it still says
Yeah, go ahead.
40,000. Is that the car maximum base price?
Yes, and I've been lobbied extensively
yeah.
to increase that amount, and I've
So have I.
resisted at all turns. I feel like Dave can tell you the exact number of models that are available, 40,000 and under, but I think it's like about a dozen, and I just feel like $40,000 for a car is, I know it's an electric car, it's a lot of money, we have incentives to bring that down, but I just don't know that we need to be paying incentives to premium cars for folks that can probably afford to buy them themselves.
Thank you.
I agree with that. It's a relatively small amount of money, and I think that we need to be strategic in how we apportion it. And it's not only are we setting limits on the income of households, but we're also saying that with the availability of cars and the price is going down and the number of models available is increasing, that's not that is a reasonable standard to make the money go as far as it possibly can.
You're right, Senator Kitchell.
I agree with Senator Kitchell. She's right.
Yeah.
But I am getting those, people suggesting like, well, could it be moved up a little bit? But I don't know. I support keeping it at where it is. I wanted to be able to report back, or just wondered if you guys had thought about it and looked at it at all.
I suppose if some point somebody needed to have, like Ford is coming out with their F10, if they actually needed to have that vehicle for their
That's
work and their home life, maybe we should consider it when there is a demonstrated need for a vehicle that exceeds that threshold, but we're not there yet. And for people to say, I just would prefer a higher, I don't know, a more luxurious car. But I'm speaking with someone who has a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and before that, a Chevy Geo that had 200,000+ miles. So, I kind of feel that our major goal is substitution of these vehicles, and that having a cap on income and a cap on what we're buying at this point with the relatively small amount of money that we've got is sound policy.
Michelle, you mentioned yesterday, I think, in some of the testimony that the agency was going out for some studies on forgive me if I'm wrong. We'd have to ask Senator Kitchell if I was right. But so, did you say something that you had like 3 studies that were going to come back into January, and were they just for the impact of what electrification was going to do with the gas tax, or was there more to that? Do you
So-
recall that?
I do. I think you're referring to the one study that we're issuing the RFP on, and I will get that over to Liz to share with you folks. That's for the road use charge. And so how are we going to do what Senator Mazza would love us to do sooner rather than later,
Right, that's
which
right.
is find a way to collect a fee from electric vehicle users for their use of the roadway network. And there's, folks that have registered vehicles in Vermont, and then there are folks that are charging their cars in Vermont, but they're not registered here. And there's a variety of ways you can go about collecting this fee. And so we're going to be studying all of the ways to do it for both those sets of drivers.
Any studies with what the anything to do with what the electric companies want to trade back and forth or anything like that have been commissioned? And the reason why I ask is I've got a couple electric companies that want to talk to me on Tuesday, but no studies. I think they just want to get where my position is as far as how I would see us moving forward and trying to see their involvement or what we would want for their involvement or anything like that. Nothing out there. No studies with that right now.
We have worked extensively historically, and the distribution utilities will be a part of our study going forward, because we do want to, document the fact that we have looked at, what if we just put a meter on somebody's house and charged them for the per kilowatt hour basis for the electricity they're using, and then take a share of that and put it in the transportation fund. And we have received extensive feedback from the utilities that is not going to work for them at this point. So, we'll be including the discussion of that in our.
The state's more along the lines of collecting it as a registration fee.
Well, there's a few different ways we can go about it. And so we're going to bring you back the whole gamut of ways to do it. Yep.
Okay, fair enough. And thank you.
And if I could just add, Section 21 of the Transportation Bill also includes some language related to rate design for utilities. So kind of separate from the gas tax issues, but more, are there off-peak rates for EV charging and things of that sort? And I assume there'll be an opportunity for you to hear more directly from the folks at the Public Service Department on what their thinking is.
Yep. Next week we'll have that presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
So good news on the bidding, man.
Yes. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one more.
Yes, go right ahead, Senator Pertzler.
I was going to ask about, I got approached by folks that are running fleet or like nonprofit, like, car share type things, that said that they thought they weren't eligible because they're not an individual, or that, I can't remember what the issue was. So I didn't know if you thought that we needed legislative change to make that available, especially for the vehicles. And I think Senator Chittenden brought this up the other day. Some fleet vehicles drive twice as much as a individual. So that seems like that's just the type of car that we'd want to incentivize to switch. So I guess there's 2 issues. Are they eligible, nonprofit, in particular fleets? And then 2, would they be able to get more than one incentive if they did more than one car?
So they currently, as we would understand it, are not eligible. And so we are actually going to have, we've asked Anthea to prepare language, and I'm going to put it up on the screen right now and share that. Thank you for reminding me, Senator Pertzler. And so what we're proposing that we'll be bringing forward as new language is that not more than 5 incentives for either a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle or a battery electric vehicle, or a combination of 2 incentives and of one kind and 3 of another, whatever, for a tax exempt organization in Vermont who is providing Vermonters with transportation alternatives to personal vehicle ownership. And so that could be a car sharing organization. It could be a ride sharing organization that's nonprofit or tax exempt. And so that would be encompassed in the new language that we're proposing. You're muted, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's the highlighted language.
That's the highlighted language, yeah. And the other thing in this section that we would want to change is, I'll just go back to the top here, is right now it's one incentive per household. And we would like to suggest that it be one incentive per person per year. We had a case where a person leased an electric vehicle through the program, received an incentive. The vehicle that they leased had a certain range of driving that you could drive. I think, I don't know, it was 80 miles for per charge. And they ended up getting a job that was further away from their home, and that vehicle didn't work for them anymore. And so they wanted to be able to trade in their lease for a vehicle that had a longer range. And so from our perspective, if your circumstances change, we want to incentivize you to continue to drive an electric vehicle. And if you trade in your vehicle, then that's a used vehicle that will be in our market. And it's also, we've had some trouble with folks not realizing, even though it's clear on the application that, both the husband and wife can't both get a vehicle. They have some have tried to get a second vehicle. And, it's like, well, we really want to promote people having these vehicles and reducing emissions. And so do we really, what if there were a parent and they have, somebody, a younger young adult or teenage person in their household who has to have a car to drive for work? Wouldn't we want that person to have a car as well, and take advantage of the incentive and get in this vehicle and save that money? So that was the other change we're suggesting here.
Okay, question? Anything else, Michelle?
No, Senator, that's it for today. And we not only covered everything for today, but we ticked one off for next week too.
No, you're right on target. You had a lot on your mind this morning. Wow. You were right about everything too.
Not as correct as Senator Kitchen. But.
Oh God.
Oh my
Don't end my
God.
Friday with that. Please.
No wonder I'm so fatigued by the end of the week.
This is Good Friday. Let's tell the truth today. Okay.
Yeah, right.
I
Well,
do my best.
Thank you very much for that from AOT. I appreciate it. And next week we'll get into the whole bill in general and go through it line by line. So
Thank you.
thanks again. Appreciate it.
Happy Easter.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Liz, you can take us off live for a moment.
Dave, did you have one more thing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. So I did just want to add one thing in terms of the current status of the state incentive program. So before any additional funds are appropriated, as of this morning, we're down to a little under $300,000.
Wow.
And we're on pace to spend down about $130,000 in the month of March. So it appears that we'll be out of funding before the end of June if present trends keep up. And there's a lot of uncertainty around supply because of some of the supply chain issues around computer chips and COVID more generally. But just so you know, it does look like we may be having to suspend the program for some period of time until.
Well, we could, depending on when you think you're going to be out of money, the budget, I would hope, would be passed in early May, and we could make that appropriation effective upon passage. So we could deal with that spending trend. That would be one way, assuming that we would at least have money to get through early May. And if we want to move that appropriation ahead, we could do that. So I just put that out as an option for the committee.
Good suggestion.
Mhm.
I won't say it. I won't say it. I just said good suggestion. Okay?
Yes. Well, and you may not agree, but I'm just
Oh,
saying.
no,
No, you're right, Jane. We agree.
Yeah, I left myself open. I said, good suggestion. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I can't handle any more today. I'm maxed out.
But anyway, that's just something I don't know if, when we go through the budget, we can, that's a decision that we can make. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
All right. So there is a solution if we,
Okay,
if we want to, take it.
Dave, anything else you have for us?
That was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the input this morning. It was very productive.